January 17th, 1940, Brussels, Belgium. The office of Union Minière du Haut Katanga. The winter rain taps against tall windows, overlooking the grey cobblestone streets. Inside, a Belgian executive named Edgar Sengier sits at his mahogany desk, reading intelligence reports that have crossed his desk from contacts in Germany. The pages speak of unusual inquiries requests for uranium or questions about refining processes, whispers of scientific programs accelerating in Berlin laboratories. His fingers rest on a folder marked Shinkalab, the name of a mine deep in the Belgian Congo. A mine that holds the richest uranium deposits on Earth. The rain continues its percussion. Sengier makes a decision that will echo across continents and years. He will move the ore. He will move it away from Europe, away from German reach. He does not yet know that this choice will help birth the most terrible and transformative weapon humanity has ever conceived. Across the Atlantic, America is not yet at war. The nation watches Europe burn from a careful distance, still wrapped in the comfortable isolation that two oceans provide. In university laboratories from Berkeley to Chicago, physicists sketch equations and argue about atomic theory over coffee that has gone cold. They understand, in abstract terms, that splitting the atom could release extraordinary energy. They have read the papers from Germany, from Italy, from France, but understanding and achieving are separated by an ocean of practical impossibility. America, in 1940, possesses virtually no uranium suitable for atomic research. The periodic table element number 92 exists in American soil, scattered in low-grade deposits across the Colorado Plateau, locked in carnotite ores that would require mountains of rock to yield pounds of usable material. The United States, for all its industrial might, for all its factories and foundries, lacks the one element necessary to enter the atomic age. It is a power without fuel, a key without a lock. The irony cuts deep. America in 1940 stands as the world's greatest industrial nation. Its steel mills outproduce all of Europe combined. Its automobile factories turn out millions of vehicles annually. Its electrical grid lights cities that never sleep. Yet the nation cannot produce significant quantities of the one material that might determine the outcome of any future conflict. German scientists have access to uranium from Czechoslovakia's Joachimsthal mines. Seized after the Munich Agreement carved up that nation like a Christmas goose. Japanese researchers pursue their own atomic theories, though their program will never achieve what they hope. And America, vast and wealthy America, must look elsewhere. Must look, as it happens, to the heart of Africa, to a Belgian colony, to a single extraordinary mine. Shinkalab, the name means fruit that scalds in the local Swahili dialect, a reference to the mine's orange and yellow ores that seem to burn with inner color. The mine sits in Katanga province, in what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo, but was then the Belgian Congo, a colonial possession ruled with varying degrees of brutality and exploitation. The mine had been discovered in 1915 by a British geologist, and Union Minière had worked it intermittently for radium, that miraculous element that glowed in the dark and seemed to promise medical breakthroughs. Radium commanded extraordinary prices, tens of thousands of dollars per gram. Uranium, the ore's primary component, was merely industrial waste used to color ceramics orange and glass yellow. No one imagined uranium itself would become more valuable than gold, more sought after than diamonds, more strategically critical than oil. But in the late 1930s, everything changed. In December 1938, German scientists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann split the uranium atom in a Berlin laboratory. The news traveled through the physics community like electricity through copper wire. Lisa Meitner and Otto Frisch, refugees from Nazi persecution, correctly interpreted the results during a winter walk in Sweden. They understood that splitting uranium released energy according to Einstein's famous equation that mass could become energy. that a small amount of matter could unleash forces previously reserved for stars. The implications arrived in America through a letter that Albert Einstein, himself a refugee, signed and sent to President Franklin Roosevelt. The letter warned that Germany might build atomic bombs. It urged American research. It opened a door that could never be closed, yet research requires materials. In 1940, American uranium production amounted to almost nothing. The Colorado Plateau held carnotite deposits, averaging perhaps 0.2% uranium oxide. Processing tons of rock to extract pounds of uranium seemed economically absurd, technologically daunting. Then scientists learned about They learned that this single mine in the Congo produced or running 65% uranium oxide, 300 times richer than American deposits. Some or samples touched 75% purity, approaching the concentration of refined material. It was geological miracle, an accident of ancient volcanic activity and millions of years of erosion that had concentrated uranium into a deposit unmatched anywhere on Earth. And in 1940, that or sat in warehouses in Belgium and in metal drums stacked on docks in the port of Lobito. Angola. Edgar Sengia understood the danger before most governments did. As managing director of Union Minière, he possessed both the authority and the foresight to act. When his intelligence sources confirmed German interest in uranium, he ordered 1,200 tons of Shinkalab, or shipped to New York, not to Belgium, where German invasion seemed increasingly likely, not to England, already at war and vulnerable to bombing and blockade, to America, still neutral, still safe across the Atlantic's protective width. The ore traveled by ship from African ports, crossed the equator, navigated the submarine-threatened waters of the North Atlantic, and arrived in New York Harbor in September 1940. Longshoremen unloaded the barrels and stacked them in a warehouse on Staten Island, in a facility owned by Archer Daniels Midland, a company that processed grain and vegetable oils. The most strategic material in the world sat among sacks of flour and barrels of corn oil, unguarded, unrecognized, waiting for a nation that did not yet know it needed it. The Japanese military, thousands of miles away, pursued its own atomic dreams with different resources and different expectations. Japanese physicists understood nuclear fission. They had studied in Europe's great universities. They knew the theories, grasped the mathematics. But Japan lacked uranium deposits entirely. The home islands yielded no significant ore. Korea, under Japanese occupation, offered nothing. Manchuria, conquered and controlled, held no atomic treasures. Japan would have to look to its new conquests, to Burma, to Malaya, to the Dutch East Indies, hoping to find uranium in territories seized by force. They would find only tracers, amounts insufficient for any serious program. The Japanese expected their scientific ingenuity to overcome material limitations. They expected their warrior spirit to compensate for industrial disadvantage. They did not expect that America, once aroused, would marshal resources on a scale that defied imagination. December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor burns. America enters the war with fury and purpose. Within weeks, the Manhattan Project crystallizes from scattered university research into a massive industrial undertaking. The scientists already know they need uranium. They already know about enrichment, about isotope separation, about the difference between U-235 and U-238. Natural uranium contains only 0.7% of the fissile U-235 isotope that will sustain a chain reaction. The rest is U-238, which absorbs neutrons and stops the reaction before it can cascade. To build a bomb, scientists must enrich the uranium, increasing the concentration of U-235 to 90% or higher. But enrichment in 1942 is purely theoretical. No one has done it on any meaningful scale. No one knows which method will work. No one knows if any of it is even possible. General Leslie Groves, the Army engineer who built the Pentagon and now commands the Manhattan Project, approaches Edgar Sengier in a New York office in September 1942. Groves needs uranium. Sengier smiles, perhaps allows himself a moment of satisfaction, and tells Groves about the 1,200 tons sitting in a Staten Island warehouse. Groves cannot believe his fortune. The ore has been waiting for 2 years, sitting in barrels among grain silos. The richest uranium ore on Earth, already on American soil. Within days, Groves purchases the entire stockpile. Within weeks, he arranges for additional shipments from the mine reopens, operates under wartime urgency, extracts every possible ton. Over the course of the war, Union Minière will ship 30,000 tons of Shinkalab ore to America. This single mine will provide most of the uranium for the Manhattan Project. Without Shinkalab, without Sengier's foresight, the American atomic program would have struggled for years to accumulate enough material to experiment, much less build weapons, but raw ore is only the beginning. Uranium must be purified, converted to uranium hexafluoride gas, then enriched. The Manhattan Project pursues multiple enrichment methods simultaneously, not knowing which will succeed. Electromagnetic separation, gaseous diffusion, thermal diffusion, centrifuge technologies, method receives funding, facilities, scientific attention. It is American abundance in action, throwing resources at every possible solution, letting industrial capacity and material wealth overcome theoretical uncertainty. And all of it requires a place to do the work. A location vast enough to house factories that dwarf anything built before, remote enough to maintain secrecy, connected enough to receive raw materials and ship finished products. The site chosen is in East Tennessee, in a valley system near the town of Knoxville. The area is called Black Oak Ridge, a series of parallel ridges and valleys created by erosion of ancient Appalachian folds. The land is rural, agricultural, dotted with small farms and crossroads communities. The Tennessee Valley Authority has recently built a Norris Dam nearby, providing abundant electrical power. The terrain offers natural isolation between different facilities. The location sits far from either coast, safe from enemy attack, yet connected by rail to the industrial heartland. In September 1942, the government begins acquiring land. Farms are purchased, sometimes through negotiation, sometimes through eminent domain. Families pack belongings and leave homes their grandparents built. Within months, 59,000 acres pass into government control. The town of Oak Ridge begins to rise from farmland and forest, a city built for a single secret purpose. The Germans, meanwhile, struggle with different problems. Their uranium supplies from Czechoslovakia are adequate but not exceptional. Their heavy water production in Norway, intended to moderate neutron speeds in reactor experiments, becomes a target for Allied sabotage. Their scientists, divided among competing programs and deprived of Jewish colleagues who fled or were murdered, make progress but lack the industrial infrastructure to move from theory to production. Germany could have built an atomic bomb, but doing so would have required resources the regime directed elsewhere, to V-2 rockets, to jet aircraft, to conventional weapons production. The German atomic program never receives the commitment, never commands the priority that the Manhattan Project enjoys. German physicists expected their theoretical brilliance to suffice. They did not expect that American industrial capacity, once focused, would prove more decisive than theoretical elegance. Oak Ridge grows with impossible speed. By 1943, the site employs over 40,000 workers. By 1945, the number reaches 75,000. The workers come from across the South and beyond, farmers displaced by mechanization, women eager for war, work and good wages, African Americans seeking opportunities denied in their hometowns. They arrive by bus and train, carrying cardboard suitcases, expecting temporary work on another government construction project. They find a city rising in mud and dust, a city of hastily built dormitories and cafeterias, of churches and theaters and bowling alleys, all constructed in the Tennessee hills. Most workers have no idea what they are building. Compartmentalization is strict. Workers operate equipment, monitor dials, collect samples, but the processes remain mysterious. Signs everywhere warn that loose lips sink ships. People learn not to ask questions. They work their shifts, cash their paychecks, and wonder what it all means. The Y12 facility uses electromagnetic separation to enrich uranium. The method is called a variation on the mass spectrometer that uses magnetic fields to separate U-235 from U-238. Building calatrons requires copper for electromagnetic coils, thousands of tons of copper. But copper is a strategic wartime material, rationed and scarce. General Groves solves the problem by borrowing silver from the United States Treasury. Not silver coins, but silver bullion from Fort Knox and West Point depositories. 14,000 tons of silver, worth over $300 million at 1940s prices. The silver is formed into wire, wound into coils, installed in magnets. After the war, every ounce is returned to the Treasury. It is the kind of material abundance that staggers the imagination, using the nation's silver reserves as industrial components because copper is temporarily scarce. The women who operate the calatrons at White Wealth call themselves cubicle girls. They sit at control panels, adjusting dials and watching gauges, maintaining the precise electrical currents that keep the magnetic fields stable. They do not know they are enriching uranium. They know only that the needles must stay within certain ranges, that the process must run continuously, that mistakes ruin the product. They are trained like factory workers, like machine operators, but the machines they operate are unlike anything built before. Each calatron weighs hundreds of tons. Each requires vacuum pumps to maintain near-perfect emptiness inside the separation chambers. Each consumes enormous amounts of electricity, and each produces only grams of enriched uranium per day. It is an industrial process of stunning inefficiency, viable only because America can afford the inefficiency, can pour resources into any problem until the problem yields. The K25 facility, built simultaneously, uses gaseous diffusion to enrich uranium. The method relies on uranium hexafluoride gas passing through thousands of porous barriers. The lighter U-235 molecules diffuse slightly faster than U-238 molecules. After thousands of stages, the concentration increases enough to be useful. The K25 building becomes the largest structure in the world under one roofer, U-shaped facility covering 44 acres, half a mile long on each leg. Inside, thousands of diffusion stages connect in series, each stage requiring pumps and valves and barriers made of nickel powder compressed into porous membranes. The entire facility is a monument to American manufacturing capability. It demonstrates what can be achieved when resources are unlimited, when urgency overrides cost, when national survival seems to depend on success. The Japanese, isolated and blockaded, watch their own atomic program wither from material starvation. The limited uranium they acquired from conquered territories proves insufficient. Their industrial base, strained by years of war, cannot support the massive infrastructure that enrichment requires. American submarines sink Japanese shipping, cutting the home islands off from raw materials and food. Japanese cities burn under incendiary raids. The scientists continue their research, but it is research disconnected from possibility. They expected their determination to overcome material disadvantage. They believed that sacrifice and will could substitute for industrial capacity. They learned, as Germany learned, that modern war is fought with resources as much as courage. That the nation which can marshal the most steel, the most oil, the most aluminum, the most uranium, holds advantages that bravery alone cannot counter. At Oak Ridge, the workers live in a secret city that appears on no maps. The government assigns the site a postal code, P.O. Box 1663, Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Soldiers guard the gates, checking identification badges, searching vehicles. The city is segregated, following the Jim Crow laws of the South. African American workers live in separate hutments, eat in separate cafeterias, use separate facilities. Yet they are here, working for good wages, contributing to something important even if they do not know what. The city has newspapers that report war news but never mention the site's purpose. The city has schools for workers, children, hospitals for the sick, churches for every denomination. It is an American city in miniature, compressed and accelerated, built in 2 years instead of 20. By early 1945, both Y-12 and K-25 are producing enriched uranium. The electromagnetic method yields highly enriched material, but in small quantities. The gaseous diffusion method produces larger volumes, but at lower enrichment levels. The two methods work in tandem. K-25 enriches natural uranium to perhaps 20%. Then Y-12 enriches it further to weapons-grade concentrations above 90%. Every few days, another kilogram of weapons-grade U-35 accumulates. The scientists have calculated that about 50 kilograms, roughly 110 pounds, will be enough for a single bomb. Through the winter and spring of 1945, the stockpile grows. Each kilogram represents thousands of hours of operation, thousands of workers' efforts, millions of dollars in electricity and materials. The symbolic object that threads through this story is not a weapon or a meal, but a metal drum. The drums that carried Shinkalab, or from African mines to American shores. The drums that sat in a Staten Island warehouse, waiting. The drums that were opened in Oak Ridge, their contents fed into conversion furnaces and enrichment cascades. Each drum held perhaps 500 pounds of ore, or 65% pure, ore that glowed faintly with radioactive decay. The drums were ordinary industrial containers, steel with sealed lids, marked with shipping codes and destination labels. But inside each drum lay the possibility of chain reactions, the potential for megaton explosions, the concentrated fury of atomic nuclei. The drums represent the transformation of matter into possibility, of rocks dug from African soil into weapons that redefined warfare. They are the vessels of abundance African or American industry, scientific knowledge from refugees who fled European persecution. Everything the Manhattan Project achieved flowed through those metal drums. German scientists, in the war's final months, are captured by advancing Allied armies. American intelligence teams find atomic research facilities, laboratories, documents. They find a program that never came close to building a bomb. German physicists had pursued reactor research, hoping to create a self-sustaining chain reaction, but they never solved the engineering problems. They never enriched uranium on any significant scale. They never achieved the industrial mobilization that Oak Ridge represented. After the war, captured German scientists expressed surprise at what America accomplished. They had expected American physics to be inferior, American industry to be crude. They believed European theoretical sophistication would prove decisive. They discovered instead that American pragmatism, the willingness to build 20 solutions simultaneously, to waste resources on failed approaches, to value results over elegance, produced the weapons they had only theorized about. July 16, 1945, Alamogordo, New Mexico. The Trinity Test. The plutonium bomb developed at Los Alamos using plutonium from reactors in Hanford. Washington, detonates at 5:29 a.m. The fireball brightness equals 10 suns. The mushroom cloud rises 7 miles. The shockwave breaks windows 120 miles away. Scientists watch through dark glass, seeing their equations made manifest. Witnessing the power they have spent 3 years creating. J. Robert Oppenheimer, the scientific director, recalls a line from the Bhagavad Gita: "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." But the uranium bomb, the gun-type design called Little Boy, is never tested. The scientists are confident it will work. The design is simpler, more straightforward than the plutonium implosion mechanism. And there is not enough enriched uranium to waste on a test. Every gram of U-235 from Oak Ridge is reserved for the weapon that will be used. August 6, 1945, Hiroshima, the Enola Gay, releases Little Boy at 8:15 a.m. local time. The bomb falls for 43 seconds, then detonates 1,800 feet above the city. 64 kilograms of uranium-235 enriched at Oak Ridge from Congolese, or achieve critical mass. The chain reaction lasts microseconds. The explosion releases energy, equivalent to 15,000 tons of TNT. The temperature at the hypocenter reaches several million degrees. 60,000 people die instantly. Buildings vaporize within half a mile of ground zero. The city's wooden structures ignite across 2 miles. By the end of 1945, deaths from burns, radiation, and injuries will reach 140,000. It is the first atomic bombing. 3 days later, Nagasaki burns under a plutonium weapon. Japan surrenders on August 15th. The war ends. The workers at Oak Ridge learn what they built only when the news breaks. The secret suddenly makes sense. The urgency, the security, the scale of the facilities. They realize they have been part of something unprecedented. Some feel pride at ending the war, at saving the lives an invasion of Japan would have cost. Some feel horror at the destruction, at the civilian deaths, at the weapon's terrible power. Most feel both pride and horror intertwined. The knowledge that their work shortened the war inseparable from the knowledge that their work killed tens of thousands in seconds. The cubicle girls who adjusted dials and watched gauges learned that their routine shifts produced the material for Hiroshima. The maintenance workers who kept the pumps running and the diffusion barriers clean learned that their labor fed the enrichment cascade. The bus drivers and cooks and janitors learn that their support roles enabled the bomb. It is too vast to process immediately, too complex for simple emotions. Shinkalov continues, producing uranium after the war. The mine operates for American nuclear weapons programs through the 1950s. When the Belgian Congo gains independence in 1960, the new government nationalizes the mine. It closes in 1961, depleted and exhausted. The tunnels flood. The surface installations decay. The village that grew around the mine disperses. Today, Shinkalov sits abandoned. The mine that powered the atomic age returned to jungle and silence. The ore that traveled from Central Africa to Oak Ridge to Hiroshima has its origin in a place most people cannot find on a map. A place whose contribution to history remains largely unknown. The irony persister, colonial mine in an exploited territory, provided the material that enabled American victory. That established American power, that shaped the post-war world order. Oak Ridge itself transforms after the war. The city is no longer secret. The facilities continue operating, producing material for nuclear weapons throughout the Cold War. The site becomes a national laboratory, conducting research into nuclear energy, isotope production, supercomputing. The workers who came temporarily stayed permanently. Families put down roots. The hastily built city of 1943 becomes a real city with history and identity. The segregation that marked the wartime years slowly erodes. though more slowly than justice requires. The site that once symbolized American industrial might becomes a reminder of what that might created: weapons capable of ending civilization, and the knowledge that such weapons could never be uninvented. The Germans expected their scientific tradition to secure victory. They expected that the nations which produced Einstein and Heisenberg, Planck and Bohr, would lead in atomic research. They did not account for the fact that Einstein fled to America, that many of the Manhattan Project's leading scientists were European refugees, that Hitler's racial policies drove away the very minds that might have built German atomic bombs. The Japanese expected their warrior ethos to overcome material disadvantage. They believed in spiritual strength, in sacrifice, in the divine wind that would preserve the homeland. They did not expect that American industry, once mobilized, would produce ships faster than submarines could sink them, aircraft faster than they could be shot down, and atomic weapons that made invasion unnecessary. America in 1940 had no uranium. By 1945, America had produced enough enriched uranium to destroy a city, and enough industrial infrastructure to produce more whenever needed. The transformation happened because one Belgian executive moved or out of Europe, because American scientists convinced Roosevelt to fund atomic research, because General Groves drove the Manhattan Project with relentless efficiency, because 75,000 workers at Oak Ridge operated equipment they did not understand for purposes they could not ask about. It happened because America possessed resources to attempt every solution simultaneously, to build entire cities for single purposes, to borrow the nation's silver reserves to wind electromagnetic coils. It happened because the geologic accident that concentrated uranium in Shinkolab placed that ore within reach of the nation that could most effectively exploit it. The epilogue is written in radioactive isotopes with half-lives measured in millions of years. The uranium extracted from Shinkolab, enriched at Oak Ridge, detonated over Hiroshima, decays slowly in the ruins and in the bodies of survivors. The story connects colonial exploitation in Africa to industrial mobilization in Tennessee to atomic destruction in Japan. It links Belgian mining companies to American engineering to Japanese casualties. It demonstrates that modern warfare is fought with periodic table elements as much as soldiers, that whoever controls critical materials shapes history's course. The metal drums that carried ore across oceans became vessels of transformation, transforming matter into energy, scientific theory into military reality, a neutral nation into a nuclear superpower. The lesson, if such horror can yield lessons, is that abundance itself can be decisive. Not just abundance of courage or will, but abundance of resources, the electrical power to run enrichment cascades, the silver to wind electromagnetic coils, the steel to build K-25, the administrative capacity to coordinate 75,000 workers, the scientific talent to solve unprecedented problems. The Manhattan Project succeeded not because American scientists were superior, but because American industry could build solutions at scale, could afford to pursue multiple approaches, could waste resources on failures without jeopardizing the overall program. Germany and Japan fought with brilliant scientists and determined soldiers. America fought with that, and with something more than industrial capacity to turn theories into factories, to convert African or into Asian destruction, to build weapons whose development cost $2 billion at a time when that sum could build 2,000 schools or 100 hospitals. The workers at Oak Ridge could not know, in 1943 or 1944, what they were building, but they could sense its importance in the urgency, in the security, in the scale of effort. They could sense it in the scientists who arrived from universities, in the military officers who supervised construction, in the government commitment that built a city where farms had stood. They sensed they were part of something larger than ordinary war work, larger than building ships or planes or tanks. They were correct. They were building the future, A future where 7 nations would eventually possess atomic weapons, where nuclear deterrence would prevent direct great power conflict for decades, where the spectre of atomic annihilation would haunt every international crisis. The ore came from Africa. The enrichment happened in Tennessee. The destruction fell on Japan, but the knowledge belongs to the world now and cannot be taken back. Every nation that wishes to enrich uranium can eventually learn how. Every nation that acquires the materials and the industrial infrastructure can eventually build weapons. The barrier is not knowledge that diffused rapidly after 1945. The barrier is materials and industry, the same barriers that stopped Germany and Japan. And those barriers erode over time as nations industrialize, as mining technology improves, as centrifuge designs become more efficient. The Manhattan Project succeeded because America in 1940 gained access to Shinkolab, or because Oak Ridge rose from Tennessee farmland, because thousands of workers turned dials and watched gauges, without knowing their labor would reshape history in the end. America had no uranium in 1940, but America had oceans for protection, land for factories, rivers for power, allies for support, and the willingness to mobilize completely. America had Edgar Sengier's foresight, moving or across the Atlantic before war began. America had the Tennessee Valley, where electricity ran cheap and land was available. America had the industrial tradition that built railroads across continents and skyscrapers toward clouds. And when all those advantages combined with Congolese uranium, with refugee scientists' knowledge, with Oak Ridge workers' labor, the result was Trinity's flash and Hiroshima's fire. The lesson written in that flash, burned into that city, is that modern war is total in mobilization, total in destruction, total in the transformation it brings. The metal drums that carried Shinkolab ore are empty now, their contents dispersed as radioactive particles across the planet. But they carried more than ore. They carried the future, and the future they carried burns still.